to the cloud. Hi, Adam. Nobody's saying hi to you yet. I will type in hi so you don't feel alone in the chat. Yes, please feel free to chat, ask questions. I will be monitoring that to surface things as we go forward. But this is exciting stuff. So again, behavioral science secrets for more productive meetings with Lindsay today. If you don't know about Lindsay, if you haven't met Lindsay, you weren't at her incredible sludge talk, or actually book discussion is what we called it. But a couple months ago, Lindsay, she is an expert in applying behavioral insights to encourage more meaningful behavioral change. She's really interested in interventions that make the daily behaviors that lead to long-term goal success, like exercising or retirement saving, not just easier, but enjoyable and fun. At IL, she focused on designing and testing interventions in the financial and health domains. Before she joined Irrational Labs, she was a senior behavioral researcher at the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University, a behavioral science center committed to research to make people happier, healthier, and wealthier. Prior to being with us at IL and the Center for Advanced Hindsight, she worked for a little office called the Federal Government Accountability Office at New York University on multi-site school interventions to reduce the racial academic achievement gap. Her research has been funded by grants from the National Science Foundation, the Templeton Foundation, and she has published in top policy and psychological journals. She's consulted for energy and sustainability nonprofits and worked with clients as varied as the meditation startups and cookbooks to international banks to incorporate behavioral science insights. She received her BA in psychology from a funky little place in Oregon called Reed College. Isn't this, Lindsay, isn't Reed, I mean, I know a lot about Reed, but it's where Steve Jobs famously dropped out of, correct?
Yes, he is one of our favorite, like, sort of alumni. Although the woman, Barbara, I'm not going to pronounce her last name right, Einreich, who just recently passed away. Yeah, she's a Reedy. And I think, like, I feel very strongly about her.
I think all schools have like their famous dropouts, like at Michigan, exactly. Madonna at University of Michigan, Madonna went there for a year, Iggy Pop went there for a year. So they're like honorary alum. But I would be all for giving Madonna an honorary PhD, but I just don't see it happening.
I don't think she's circling back to Michigan anytime soon.
Her daughter went there. Her daughter.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, you know what? I take it back then.
Yeah. So she's come back a few times, and I guess she has a house up by Traverse City. Like, she bought a big estate for her parents. I know this because my wife is a super Madonna fan. We stalked her childhood.
She is.
Oh no, really, I swear we had
asking for a friend.
No, this is true, Lindsay. This is true. We drove to Bay City, Michigan to see her childhood home. That's random. Yeah.
That is specific.
Yeah, it's very, I told you, I wasn't joking. But at any rate, Reed College, this aside, Steve Jobs Honorary University, where he took calligraphy classes. And she has a PhD in social psychology from the University of Virginia. I love this last sentence, so I will read it with fidelity. In the service of the quest for enjoyable exercise, she's completed her 200-hour yoga teacher certification and 2, how do we say this again? Bar,
yes.
Good. I always mess it up. Instructor certifications. So without any more of my ado, I will stop screen sharing and let Lindsay come on down. So Lindsay, awesome to have you.
Thank you. You give me a hard time about Bart, but I'll have you know, I was in Chicago just recently, and Erin and I realized too late we were co-working. I was with another woman who works at Irrational Labs, and we realized too late that we should have invited you, but we went to a bar class together. I made Erin join me. I was like, we should work for the morning, and then we should go to a bar class, and then we should have lunch. And so hopefully I have converted her slowly but surely. I'm going to get the whole team.
Oh, Lindsay, I have to tell you, I did yoga once and it was such a nightmare because they tell you to like clear your mind and stuff.
You're like, that's not me.
Not working for me at all. I just felt like all I heard were voices and I'm not very flexible. It was tricky.
Okay. You sound like you'll need more convincing, but we can get there.
I thought you were going to say you sound like a lost cause, but let's.
No,
let's
I would never say that.
I'm going to mute now.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining today. We are talking about meetings. The irony, I know, a meeting about meetings. But I would like to think of this more as a training or a conversation. And hopefully you will leave with some insights and some thoughts about what you could be doing differently. I assume you all are here because you have been in a bad meeting before. So I don't know if you want to put it in the chat or tell me, just call out what has been bothering you lately in your meetings. These are some of the things that we hear most commonly, just so you feel like it's not only you who's suffering. Wow, you guys all hold perfect meetings on time, off track. Yeah, unnecessary. Exactly. Just like start with the foundation there. I think all of these circle around the same sorts of points, right? Which is we're not really sure what we're doing in them. We invite too many people, and then we're all trying to talk and get things going, and it just goes awry, right? And so hopefully some of this will be very concrete things you can do to improve that. If you own the meeting or if you are attending, thinking about how to disrupt that a little bit. And so it shouldn't shock anyone here, these stats. Meetings often don't do what you want them to do, right? People are not focused. And so even if you do get a group of people and you're really trying to help have them like have a discussion with you, figure something out, they're checking their emails, they're online shopping, they're thinking about what to eat for lunch. Um, they're not getting it done. And then because of that, right, you're having more meetings because we didn't accomplish what we needed to in that one, and they just start eating up into your day, right? It can be truly terrible. And I loved this stat. This is not a very scientific graph that I found, but basically one of the different orgs that sells products, this is Clockwise, I'll give them that credit, they surveyed their users and they said, what would you rather do than attend a bad meeting? And you can see people are like, I would rather have teeth pulled or talk about politics than I want to go and sit in a meeting, right? Like, what can I do that is not that? Um, so they can be brutal. And I don't think we will have time in this moment to go to this website, but the HBR has a meeting calculator. So if you take that link, it'll route you over there and you can plug in the name of the meeting, how long it takes, who attends. You have to guess at the salary of the attendees, but then this calculator will tell you what, like how expensive this meeting is. And it can be very sobering. And so maybe as you advocate for fewer meetings, this might be a bit of evidence, right? Like the ROI on this meeting to say, we are just, throwing this money away. Is that the right one? Yes. HBR calculate should reroute. If it doesn't, let me know and I will find whatever the original link was. But of course, if you can reduce meetings, right, you're going to save all that money that we just calculated, and it has very meaningful impacts on the sort of outcomes that you as a manager, as a team player, as an employee care about, right? If you reduce meetings by 20%, that's going to have positive impacts on autonomy, satisfaction, and productivity. And then you can see the only bars that go down are stress and people's sense of micromanaging. And I had a different version of this graph that was sort of changes over time, like reducing meetings all the way to 100%. Really, the sweet spot where you start getting benefits is this 20 to 40%. You don't have to get rid of all meetings. The curve really flattens out. But if you can reduce by 20 to 40%, which sounds like a lot, you can have these effects. And I would say we have been working with one group on their meetings, and they on average are spending like 5 to 7 hours. 20 to 40% of that amount of time is what, like trimming 10 minutes, 20 minutes off a couple meetings, dropping one big meeting. And so it's not impossible. And so with that in mind, like what can you do to decrease meetings altogether, right? What could you drop? But then even of the meetings that you continue to have, because you can't get rid of all of them, how do you make those ones more effective? And then as they get more effective, right, you can trim them down, you can trim down their cadence, you can trim down the time. And so that's what this is focused on. It should not come as a shock that perhaps the easiest way to have better, fewer meetings is just get rid of some of them. And so I'm going to talk about really like why it's so hard to pull those off your calendar and what can we do. But this, see in the chat, you all know this. So in this talk, I have not done a lot of the explaining of behavioral principles that underlie some of these suggestions, because I know that you have gone through boot camp. And so I am assuming a baseline level of knowledge that if something is not clear, if you want me to go into detail on something, raise your hand and we can talk more about it. But I will try generally to stick with the takeaways, or I'll ask you to tell me what it is. So status quo bias, you know this one, right? We are trying not to change stuff. We are trying to stick with what's working and not pick fights, not have arguments, not try to tell people that their meeting is bad. But of course, defaults really do matter, right? This graph should be familiar to you, or the general premise, which is that having a default will drive very meaningful changes. Something as meaningful as opioid prescriptions, or something like, does this meeting stay on the calendar, right? If you remember the Express Scripts story, thinking about status quo and people switching from branded to generic medication, this company, it was a mail order pharmacy, was really struggling to get people to switch. Think back. What was that stat? So what percent of Express Scripts patients switched to generic medications after getting an incentive of free medications? So you're trying to make your meetings better. How can you incentivize? And will that pay off for you? Now, I give the value talk for boot camp as well. And so you know I like free. B, D, D, B. Okay, you all are feeling ambitious. B's and D's. So the right answer is B. It's 10%. Because in this context, well, I'll do the next question, which is what percent of Express Scripts patients switch to generic medications after you ask them to make an active choice? So in one version, in their first attempt to get people to switch, Express Scripts sent everyone a postcard and said, please mail this postcard back to us. And if you mail it back and tell us that you want generics, you can have generics free for a year. And about 10% said, okay, I'll mail it back to you. And then the second time around, Express Scripts said, nobody sent us that postcard. We're going to require you to send it back. We're going to say, can you, if you do not send us back this postcard, making an active choice between generic or branded medications, we'll have to stop sending you your meds. So this is the way to keep things coming in the mail the way you want it to. And then in that case, I'm getting some votes for D. It's a little bit, yes. Perfect. C, D's, yes. It ends up being about 80% switch to generics when they are forced to make an active choice, right? Before, the status quo was, I will continue to send you your meds if you do nothing. And so people don't do anything, right? This is working out for me. And so how can you disrupt status quo? Can you make active choice part of this process? And so it might be that you ask yourself, or you ask whoever has sent you this new calendar invite 2 questions before you schedule a meeting. And that's going to be, do we have to have this meeting? Is it necessary? And we have made this flow chart. It's a little convoluted, but the real takeaway is, do you need to discuss something with people live? And is it not just logistics, right? You're not discussing like, which hotel should we stay at when we go to that conference next week? That's an email. That's asynchronous. You could have a phone call. But if you really need a discussion, you need a lot of input, you need people to react in real time, and you are focused, you have an agenda. It's not just like, I'm a little lonely and I kind of want to chat to people. Then you can schedule a meeting. And then once you have a meeting, and in the process of thinking about what the objective is, you can be really thoughtful about who you're inviting and should you switch people to optional. So we have some sort of guidelines here for the right size given different intentions, different goals for a meeting, sometimes you do need everybody there. But if you don't invite them. It's fine. Or switch them to optional. And you've booked meetings with people because they don't respond to email. I'm going to say, what did your email look like? Which will take us on a different tangent. I can also talk to you about how you're going to make your emails better so that people will pay attention to them. But I would say, like, could you have a phone call? It depends on the dynamic. Obviously, there's some interpersonal elements here.
I think that's a really cool follow-up question. I think Adam's one. We should do that as a spin-off in the Q&A.
Making things better, how to get someone to reply to your email.
Yeah, I mean, I know the answer is like write it in all emojis, but I bet you have better answers. So.
Is that really the solution?
For me, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Make it compelling. So one of the things that I have built into this talk is divided into 5 tips, is at the end of every tip, I have tried to think about how do you actually do something with it, right? So you're like taking your notes, taking your screenshots. I really want action, right? We're biased towards action at IL and behaviors. And so I don't know that we have the time for you to do all of these things immediately, but I do want you to like really put a little bit more thought into that pre-commitment. So is there something on your calendar that you could address, right? Does something need its existence questioned? Does something need the attendees? Or do you need to figure out how to reach out to someone, right? And say, what could I drop? Or do I still have to come to this? Anyone feel really bold? You want to admit to what your meeting is? I'm seeing some nods. Eric, what are you going to get rid of?
Because sometimes we have some meetings that's related to planning or the strategy, and we invited a lot of people, but mainly half of the attendees used to participate to be engaged in the meeting. So I see there is a lot of opportunity in terms of how I facilitate and how can I involve all the people, understand a little bit their, how can I say, if they are introspective or extroverts. And I believe that would be a good point. And the second point is that those meetings that lead to no results at the end because people divert too much. And I'm just thinking about how can I improve that.
Yeah. Oh, this was a great setup for my next section, which is you have to come up with an agenda. You have got to come up with an uncomfortably specific agenda. And let's see like what that really looks like, right? The agenda is going to be the foundation for everything you do. You can call back to it. You can refer to it. It really will support you then in driving and corralling your attendees, right? Because you can say like, not on my agenda. We got to move on. And so what this looks like really is ideally it's a question and answer format. What are you trying to do? And then what does it look like to accomplish that? So for instance, right, discuss the new product, discuss the product launch. That's too big. It's too open. People are going to come in with a lot of different ideas of what that discussion needs to cover. So you want to say instead, what do we need to do to ensure that it's a success, right? And once we understand that that's the particular version of the launch that we're talking about, then it's clear, oh, well, to make sure it's a success, we need to like figure out what we're delivering and what that timeline is. And so then you know what's that decision we're trying to get to, right? And even something as simple as that Q&A format changes the tone, changes your ability to say, this is what we're trying to solve for, right? And then if you've got that sort of specificity, you can start saying what needs to happen along the way and who's going to be in charge of it. How much time are they going to spend on it, right? You can get uncomfortably specific. You know by now, IL loves being uncomfortably specific. We're going to apply it wherever we can because that does force you to be really thoughtful, especially when you're bringing in a bunch of people, a bunch of high power, expensive people, right? You need to think about how you're going to use them and what you want to get out of that. And then maybe it means you can end early. And I hear you. You're going to tell me, I hate agendas. They're hard. And they are. you have to do some work, you have to prepare. I will admit, so this is a screenshot from Irrational Labs. We have weekly Monday check-ins, the whole team comes, and we don't always write an agenda, but what we do is we assign a meeting leader, and then we have bucket time slots. And so within those buckets, you have to sort of commit to, what are we doing in this chunk? What are we doing in this chunk? And it's not as specific as the agenda on the last page, which was in like 5-minute blocks, but you can still see, this is what we're going to do. This is how you need to prep. Here's what we want you to get out of it, right? So you're going to send a great agenda, but you're also going to watch some cat videos, right? Present bias, procrastination. I'm going to ask you to think about, where do you need an agenda? And you can't write an agenda right now. They are involved documents, especially if it's a big thing where you do have a large decision to make. But go ahead and schedule something. We're on a Friday. If you've got Friday afternoon empty, you can go ahead and do this now. But I decided maybe next week when I have a lot of open time, I'm feeling really motivated, go ahead and put it in your calendar to write that agenda and email it out to your group. And the nice thing about the agenda too, right, is I think in Eric's case, it will become more clear with that agenda than who needs to come to the meeting, right? And so if you get in the habit of sending an agenda with the meeting invite, it helps you understand who actually goes on that invite and who doesn't need to go or who's optional. Everyone else turned off their video. They're like, please don't call on me and ask me to tell you what you did during this change. Amanda, I can see you. Did you find a meeting that needs an agenda? Okay.
Yeah, we have a roadmap meeting after we had somebody on our team leave. And so it's just scheduled as roadmap prioritization, but it could probably definitely use like some bullet points of like, you know, current concerns, top priorities noted, review like some of the backlog, and maybe recategorize priorities. Definitely would probably need to think through it a bit more, but off the top of my head, that's kind of, oh, hi, Kitty, what I would think of.
Wow, we get the bonus cat video and presentation on meetings. Awesome. More cat.
What more could you want? She's just stomping around. I'm sorry. Yeah, that sounds like a really useful one. So is this a standing meeting or this is a one-off?
This is a one-off meeting.
Okay.
Once our person put in their 2 weeks notice and was like, hey, this is going to cause a big shift.
Oh no.
A lot of things. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I would say for standing meetings, I don't know if anyone else is already doing this. It's nice to have a shared document and it can just be a running agenda. And then you can stick the notes in there and just have that single link in the invite, right? So that people on the team can get in there and like add it. You don't have to route through someone every time.
I do have a weekly sync with one of my, so I'm a product manager. I have a weekly sync with one of the departments that I'm managing a product for. And that would actually be really helpful just to have a shared document with the agenda. Since it's such a short meeting, it's really important to like kind of stick to the point. So
yeah. Agendas are something I've really come around on. Like in grad school, I just loved like a chatty meeting. And my partner would always go in with like his 3 questions and 2 bullets. And now I'm becoming that. Like, yes, we have to. There are just too many meetings otherwise. This is another calendaring one and pre-commitment, which is one thing that we see consistently with meetings is you have them and then you have them again, right? You have that same meeting, that same decision, that same conversation over and over. And partly it's because there's no documentation of it, or there's no way for the right people to get to it, or a lot of parallel work is happening. And so thinking about not just how do you prepare for the meeting, but then how do you ensure that people know about it right? This is another way that you can drop people off meetings, is if they can trust that the notes will be there. Sometimes you attend a meeting that you don't really have to go to because you know there's no other way for you to get that information. They're not going to put it out. So again, pre-commitments, put it on your calendar. Immediately after the meeting, and this is hard because we live in an era of Zoom meetings and you're just back to back to back, right? They go from 12 to 1, from 1 to 2, wherever possible, trying to build in buffer so that you have a few minutes after a meeting to go through your notes, organize them, go ahead, send them out, get rid of it, get it off your plate is really ideal. And it can be as simple as perhaps moving all of your meetings, your calendar defaults, to write those shorter ones where you've got like 25 instead of 30 as your like half-hour meeting, 50 instead of an hour. It feels artificial, and yeah, people can still run over that endpoint if they want, but having it initially set, right, is part of that mental model, is part of the default for how I understand I have meetings, right? Like, and how people then respond to my invite. And so I would advocate for that a little bit. And then using that time to say, have notes. I'm seeing something in the chat, take meeting notes feature in the calendar. Yeah, exactly, right? Use the tools available to you. I like a Google prompt. We do a ton in Docs. But really think about what you can do. I know in the Microsoft system, right, like SharePoint will help you get your notes in place. There are a lot of places to do this. Good notes, don't transcribe. Do not transcribe. That's not the point of notes. That's not the point of minutes. No one is ever going to read it. Don't write a novel. And so there are 2 columns here on the side that are we should blah, 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 blah. I have already glazed over. I've never even looked at this and read it because it's too boring. But instead, you want to think about what are the decisions that were made. If there is contention, right? Like maybe you do want to record that in the notes so that people understand, like, this was a hot and heavy meeting and people got worked up, but we came to a decision, right? And that's enough. You don't have to summarize everything. You don't need a play-by-play. You need to make the meetings, make your emails, make this follow-up really clear. Think about making it salient. Think about making it designed for people who are busy, getting hundreds of emails a day, sitting in meetings all day long, right? And so think about if you can format the output in a way that makes it really clear who's doing it, what that due date is. This gives a bit of shared responsibility as well, right? If I make it public to everyone that I'm doing this Gantt chart, then when it's not done, it's obvious who to talk to. So building some accountability, building deadlines, formatting, it's simple, but it really does make a difference to, as the recipient of this email, right? My desire to look at it and see what I need to do. You're busy, right? That's what this slide is. My kid is home from daycare today too, so I'm like, oh, this is ringing very true for me. Again, so shorthand, summarize, bullets, send it out as soon as possible so it's fresh, and then people can say, this doesn't work for me, or you got this wrong, or I can't make that deadline, right? And deadlines can feel hokey. I think you might feel like I shouldn't give people deadlines. That's asking a lot of them. It feels very demanding. I'm not their manager necessarily. A deadline is a way to help people understand what they need to prioritize. And the nice thing about the workplace context is there are priorities. We are used to managing and figuring out like what should come first, what do I work on next? And so it doesn't feel as weird in the workplace context where I assume most of your meetings are happening as it would if you suddenly started giving deadlines in your personal life. Like a deadline works, you can try it there too, but certainly in your request to other people, if you give them a deadline, if I say like, Ryan, I really need to see your notes by Thursday, then now Ryan knows if he's got a busy week coming up, he doesn't need to do them until Wednesday night, right? This helps him understand where does this fit in his week, in his timeline too. And so I think being really clear about your needs by way of a deadline, by way of bolded things, really helps everyone sort of be more productive. I love askamanager.org. It's a like workplace advice column. And I will say all the advice just boils down to be clearer. Be clear in your communication. Say what you need. Say what you're hoping for. So my next thing, schedule some buffer into your meetings. Or maybe in this case, you got to knock 10 minutes off of your meeting. This might be hard because you have to be thoughtful about how can I schedule things? How can I fit them in? But it really does make a difference to have a little bit of breathing room after a meeting, especially with these big ones where you've got a lot of people coming in and you are making decisions about the roadmap, about the priorities for the next quarter, right? Like, how could you talk about that for an hour straight and then move directly into your next thing and just not have any time to process it? Much less to tell other people what happened and let them also understand what the new priorities are. This one, thinking about participation. You all are a pretty quiet bunch. I'm lecturing you, and so do as I say, not as I do. But in preparation and thinking about participation, you have to think about what you want people to be doing and what have you brought them into the meeting for. Do you need everyone to discuss something? Do you need to take a vote? Do you need to brainstorm? Each of those requires different sorts of tools, right? You might need whiteboards. You might need to make sure that everybody has read something. You might just need to build in 10 minutes at the top of the meeting for them to read this memo that you know they're not going to get to ahead of time. But understanding based on your agenda, right? What are we doing? What problem are we trying to solve? Then you can think about how am I going to elicit the opinions of all of these people, right? Because you decided, right? You needed them all live. You needed their perspectives and you're going to do something with it. And so really thinking about how to spend that time is so crucial. So one thing that we hear is that they invite that a group, one might invite people to a meeting and then they don't speak. And this is an interesting question. And honestly, it's probably bigger than a meeting because why aren't they speaking up? If you've ever been to a meeting where you're silent, why didn't you say anything?
It was uncomfortable to unmute yourself in a meeting with 70 plus people.
70? Who did that to you? Was it us? Did we invite you to one of these?
No, it's always, I find it. And then I think the other one that I find always is, do you have any feedback or do you have any questions in such large groups? I think it's just very awkward to unmute yourself and talk about it. Mm-hmm. Something that we have found that works is in a mirror board, having like a place like, do you have any questions, and giving people time to just put stickies. I mm-hmm. find like a lot of that has helped us to get some more questions and some more stuff like conversation.
Yeah.
It's also difficult when there's different levels of expertise on the call. There are some where like it's a topic that I know very well, and there's people who are new to it that maybe are quiet the whole time. And conversely, there's times when if I'm on with a technical team and I'm not a technical person, I feel like I shouldn't ask a stupid question, or like I'm not going to slow everybody down trying to catch me up with background that I don't have. So it kind of calls into question like why I'm there, or maybe there's a little bit I can contribute, but I don't want to slow everybody down with my question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are all really good points, and it's tough to be that person who feels out of place, or like your opinion won't be respected in the group, or maybe you've had a history where you have said stuff and then you got overruled, and it's sort of like, well, why am I going to try? There's an element of learned helplessness there. And so in the moment, not much you can do. You can, get really brave, but I think if you are the facilitator, when you are on the other side of it, think about those things in advance. And some of it, right, is, are you inviting the right people? And then are they actually able to contribute, right? It may be that in the interest of trying to be open and having all the stakeholders in the room, you have made it that some of the stakeholders aren't actually in a good place to comment, right? I don't know how many of you have read the book The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, but it's incredible. It's totally incredible. You should read it. It'll change the way you think about parties, meetings, etc. But one of the things she says is, as the host, the meeting facilitator, whatever it is, your job is partly putting up fences and boundaries and protecting the goal of the meeting. And by inviting extra people in this sort of misplaced desire to include everyone, you end up disrupting the real point. And it makes the core group that belongs there, it disrupts their ability to actually get things accomplished. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about it, is that by inviting extra people, by trying to be inviting, you're actually undermining the real goal. So that might be part of it. Sometimes you do still have to like invite the CEO, and then that changes.
I was going to say that's a
the vibe.
difficult one. There's
Yeah.
often a lot of pressure to be like, hey, just put me on the meeting, right? And then there's somebody at a senior level who's asking questions that you've resolved like 6 weeks ago, and it's like, oh my God, now we got to, and you can't say like,
Yeah.
look, you don't need to be at this meeting, or look, can we take that offline? It's like there are power dynamics at work there also that can make that difficult.
Yeah, yeah, I agree 100%. I can't tell you to like slap down the CEO. And I think that's a bigger sort of interpersonal dynamic and larger problem about sort of like decision-making structures and those sorts of things that go on in an organization. It's like, it's bigger than a meeting, but it is, I mean, to the extent that you can be aware of it and plan for it, I guess you like budget extra time in those meetings where you know they're going to have a lot of questions, or you do try to be maybe a little more aggressive with the agenda in those contexts, right? If it's very clear to the CEO that we have 5 minutes on this, maybe it's a little bit easier, even if you know it's still going to get pushed. But as it becomes a more precise amount of time, you might be able to say like, oh, we only have X minutes for this, so I want to be sure and get to the next 2 things on the agenda, right? But I agree, very tough. I put up some suggestions for rules that you can try out in a meeting, and that can change the dynamic. I think leadership speaks last is a really interesting one, especially crucial in like a brainstorm context where you don't want everyone to just anchor on that one person's idea and no one else then feels like they're in a place that they can say anything. But you can play around with stuff, see what works, see what people hate, right? There's a lot of different things that you can think about. And then monologuers. It's really tough. I would say what works is trying to get to them before the meeting.
You should know that Priya like just threw her head back laughing when you said monologuers. She almost fell out of her chair. I can't imagine what kind of meetings you had, Priya, but it was kind of funny.
Oh, these are the hippos in the room sometimes too, right? The highest paid.
Yeah, I know.
And that's the worst combination then.
I agree. So I've been in a meeting. We were in a call where these 2 high-powered individuals just talked the whole time, and like we were raising our hands, and they just kept going, and it's rough. In those moments, you just have to be like, well, this is my life now. But if you are in charge of the meeting, hopefully you can do some work ahead of time, and you might want to. I would do it offline so they don't feel embarrassed, so that you can be gentle, so that you can blame it on other people, right? Like, oh, I know Ryan is really shy, so I know you often talk about this more, but I want to make sure that Ryan gets time to talk at this next meeting, so I'll keep an eye on you and I'll remind you, right? And then it feels like this is about me helping Ryan flourish, as opposed to me saying like, Kristen, you're always talking. And so, being gentle there, but then you've also set the tone so that in the meeting you can intervene too, right? And you can say like, oh, Kristen, remember, we've got to get to the next 2 things on the agenda, right? And if you say it at the top of the meeting, it's not as weird when you say it again, right? Where it gets uncomfortable is if you've been like stewing for 5 months of meetings, and then you're like, oh my God, why do you never stop talking, right? That's not going to work. But be gentle, set the tone early, send some reminders. It's a little bit easier. And then my last thing, just thinking about participation, is hybrid, like true hybrid. Some of us are in the room, some of us are screens on the wall, and they're brutal. And so some of it is just very tactical. Like, don't make the people in the room just give over a laptop and think that that will suffice. Please don't do that. It's so bad. It never works. You can't hear anything. If you were going to consistently have hybrid meetings in your workplace, you have got to invest in the equipment, right? You got to get a big mic. You got to get a camera on the wall. It probably still won't be good, but it will definitely be better than someone who just turns their laptop and tries to make it look at someone who's speaking. And this one I like is, if you have multiple people, also making sure that someone is explicitly tasked with keeping track of the remote individuals and sort of acting as their in-person advocate. And so if someone on the computer, on the screen on the wall, like keeps trying to jump in, then being that person in the room to say like, oh, Ryan is trying to speak. Or being someone who intentionally every few minutes says like, Ryan, do you have something here? Having that person and having their role stated to the group so that they feel empowered to interrupt, to say something, is really, really meaningful. And this one, I love an agenda. If you are doing things hybrid, you have got to understand why everyone is being brought in. And you have to be very clear on what they're going to do at different stages, and make sure that the tools are ready for them. So you don't have a bunch of people in the physical room who are able to grab stickies, and then you're like, oh shit, I forgot to prep a Miro board for the online people, right? You have to plan for that. You have to be specific, you have to prepare. And so in those cases, with a true hybrid meeting, you really need to budget time ahead of time to make sure it's gonna work, right? To make that room reservation, to buy the mic if that's what you need. All of these things have to be planned for. Okay. I keep asking you to make these implementations. I hope you do one of them. I'll ask Ryan to follow up at the next one. We'll take time at the end of Colin's talk and be like, what did you do here? How have your meetings improved? This one, I would say, just think about something that you're going to do differently in participation for your next big meeting. If anything really resonated or seems like it might work, given what you know about your team and your group.
I personally really liked your idea of the hybrid one. Is really hard. I recently facilitated a workshop where you don't know whether to face the people in the room, but that means your back is to the people on the screen. It's just like, and then you keep turning back and forth. It's just really awkward. And I loved having that one person who is the mediator and making sure that, you know, the people, there's an advocate for the people who are remote. That's something I definitely want to try out.
Yeah, I think it can be really nice. This sort of leads into the next section, to think about how you can get more people on your side. And right, like, people want better meetings. They don't want you to fail. They don't want you to waste their time. And so if you could give someone a role that says, I really want to make sure that our hybrid people are included, I think that many people would be willing to help you. And it's nice to, as the facilitator or the person running the meeting, you don't have to do everything, right?
I did want to be on cue where you talk about emboldening disruptions. But I did just want to highlight what Amanda wrote there, you know, that shared documents are this great tool for collaboration. I mean, we at RIL meetings, we almost every other week, it's like, all right, wisdom of the crowd time. And then there are big grids set up and everybody drops their 10 cents in. And while that could be sent out in an email, right? It's also nice to say, we're giving you 10 minutes here to think with the group and generate right now. So sorry, that was my emboldened disruption. Continue, Lindsay.
No, do it. Disrupt. I would say crowdsource it. And you're going to need people. You're going to need people. You're going to need someone to help you. You all should remember this, so I won't really belabor the point. If you want people to reuse their towels at a hotel, are you telling them to save the environment, or are you telling them to join their fellow guests? Thinking about social norms and what helps you exactly too. It's a trick question. There's third. There is a room norm, which is you can get even more specific than join your fellow guests. You say join your fellow guests in room 517, right? And breaking a norm can be painful. So this is, I've wiped the identifying information from this email. This is a 20 email chain that I was on, and I know better. And we're just scheduling this meeting. And at no point was I like, guys, should we just use a when is good link? I didn't speak up, and it's tough. And so I understand it will be tough to change these norms, to be the person in a meeting that you don't own, to say like, time's up, we got to move on, or like, what's the point of this meeting? Why are we having it? It's nice to have a counterpart. One of the biggest
irony of that is that it was forward better meeting stock.
Well, I've wiped it.
Okay.
But it was still really painful. It was really painful. And then the meeting itself was equally disjointed. But it's very tough to speak up when everyone is just sort of going along with it. And so thinking about how you shift norms over, you basically, you need some social permission. So it's nice if someone high powered in your company is like, this is something we're trying new, or if you as the organizer of the meeting can say, this is something we're trying a new thing where you can only talk for 20 seconds at a go before you get interrupted, right? Or we're trying, people can only present 3 slides, right? If you are trying new rules out, make it clear that this is what it is. And so people understand what the new norm is. How have we changed this space and tried out new rules, right? It's not the rest of our lives, it's not permanent, but giving that social permission out at the top. And then if you're in a large meeting that you know is going to be tricky, can you find someone to be on your team? In the very classic Solomon Asch line studies on sort of compliance, they showed people 3 lines and the lines didn't match, but everyone in the room was like, those 2. As soon as there was one person in the room who also disagreed, the participant felt comfortable disagreeing. It was only when it was uniform compliance that they went along with it. And so if you can get someone to back you up, or who you know will support you, and vice versa, that can be really powerful, right? You just need one friend. And so that's sort of what this is, thinking about how could you shift norms, or even if you're not sure yet, like, what am I comfortable with? What's feasible? Could you find someone to sort of be your partner in this process, right? I don't know if any of you all work together. Do you want to call out your partner right now? Switching meetings. Right, this is you, Ryan. Okay. Yeah, back to back. We do that sometimes. I like it. Any other norms you want to change?
Yeah, I was just talking with Adam there in the chat. I mean, this issue, so I used to feel bad if I didn't let everybody in right at the top of the hour for these meetings, these events. But then I found some other places just like let people wait. And it is a little bit better to have the soft start on the hour and the real start at 5 after, because there's just some logistics there. And I think the cool thing about remote meeting, right, is people can always do something for those 2 minutes. You've got a million things on your computer, so you don't have to feel as guilty as you might at a face-to-face meeting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and a few minutes early. That's probably our cue. So these are the 5 tips. I have had a wonderful time discussing this with you. I feel like hopefully you got something out of it, a couple of concrete ideas that you can take out and back to your meetings. Monday is a new day, you're starting fresh. Think about how you can implement this. But otherwise, thank you all so much. Ryan, do you have any closing comments for us?
Well, I was going to say to leave that slide open. Materially.
Sorry.
That's the take a screenshot slide.
Take a screenshot.
Yeah. Sorry, I was too slow. You were so excited to stop sharing. I know Adam had the email question. Blake, were you coming off mute? Did you have a meeting-y question? Oh, you just tried to psych us out.
No, I just saying that this has already given me ideas and things that I need to change for my meeting on Monday. This has been
That's
great.
what I like to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Any other meeting questions before we go to just Adam's email question and get some high-level thoughts there?
I just wanted to add something I started using a couple of years now is the feature of maybe. So it's interesting how we say yes or no to meetings, but we never use the maybe feature. It's almost like we can't say maybe, but if a meeting does not have an agenda, I'll say maybe and then reach out to the facility and say, what is my role in this or what is the agenda for the meeting? And it's a really nice, polite way of not declining it, but saying, hey, I'll say yes once I know what this meeting is and what role do I play in it.
I love that.
That's awesome. Adam, your question then about, well, I guess Lindsay, you wanted to talk briefly about what makes an effective email. So you were it was kind of a silly interchange. It's like, yo, Adam, what's in your email?
Is he writing a novel? I say this as someone who
else?
loves talking. I write the longest emails, right? There's that, is it Mark Twain quote that's like, if I had had more time, I'd have written a shorter letter. Yeah, that's me. I love talking. But I have tried very, very hard to be more thoughtful about, even when I do have a lot to say in an email, like really trying to distill it and numbering things, bolding things, putting my request like right at the top, and then sort of filling in the detail lower down in the body of the email so someone can get it early. Being a lot more thoughtful about my subject lines. I know some people really like end of message, EOM, in the end of a subject line. That's not really my style. You know, if you have like a single request and you're sending it via email, that should be a chat. Honestly, if you have a chat platform. But I think much like the notes things, trying to make your emails as to the point as possible and making it easy for someone to skim and understand what they need to do in response to it. Is it something that I can resolve right then and there when I've read this email? Then make that obvious to me, right? Or if you don't need a reply, tell people you don't need a reply.
Yeah, I feel like those are things that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm not doing them 100% of the time, but yeah, I used to work with car dealers who never have any time to respond to any emails. So I did get pretty creative with how to clarify in the subject line, like action or action needed type of thing versus like this is just information, or how to use highlighting and bolding and underlining and stuff like that to just get the most important things in front of their eyeballs first, because I knew they weren't going to read the whole thing. So I've played with that, and maybe it's just that I've run into some situations where even despite that, people just weren't going to give me their time for whatever reason. But yeah, those are all good points. I think those are all good watch outs when you're drafting an email.
Do you follow back up aggressively? This is hard for me. I hate replying and being like, did you see my email? But Kristen told me this once. She's like, you should be uncomfortable. You should just bother them. And once you bother them enough, they'll have to reply.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've definitely run them down, but sometimes the one tactic that I've used is I'll just book 15 minutes and be like, we're going to talk about this. Usually because I work remotely, those are things where I might have just decided to swing by their desk instead of sending an email. So in lieu of that, I will book a meeting sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it does feel easier. You're like on a chain that's been going back and forth. You're like, please, let's just talk about it. And it might be that they're not replying because they feel like it's something that can't be easily typed off. And so maybe it comes as a relief. But I agree. I don't always get replies to all my emails either.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't off mute while I was typing, but I was putting this in here. If you've never seen Axios's briefs, they have this smart brevity format. So like if you do their smart brevity, like I'm in Chicago, so they're like Chicago daily updates. It's an awesome format. And then they also have like a tech newsletter or a climate newsletter, but totally worth subscribing to just to see how they use formatting and this smart brevity idea. Very interesting, thoughtful around that. This is more for newsletters and updates, but obviously the principles go to like me communicating with Adam, you know, or whatever. So just a cool tool to check out.
Neat.
All right. Well, does anybody have any burning last second question? Otherwise, we're going to call this event a wrap. Lindsay, thank you so much again for being you, your joyful, wonderful, excellent self. Everybody give her some emoji and love or chat love or just send vibes across the interwebs, whatever works for you. We have Colin next week, so invite friends. That's open. Bring everybody. And also the last 3 membership events, Kristen, Colin Wednesday, and Lindsay today. I'm getting those all uploaded to YouTube. Hopefully after today, after this recording is done, because it's just easier to pull them in a batch. So they should all be up hopefully by Monday. So stay tuned. Have a wonderful weekend, or for those of you in more interesting time zones, happy weekend. And Lindsay, may your child, your kitten, and your husband all behave well for the rest of the day.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, y'all.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.